Lacey Sturm has lived through a nightmare and accomplished her dreams. For more than a decade, Lacey traveled with the successful hard rock band Flyleaf. The pain and hopelessness of Lacey's teen years and her journey to wholeness through Christ was the inspiration for many of her songs and what led her to write The Reason, a raw look at how she found a life worth living. Lacey now shares her inspirational story with young people across the country. Please welcome a woman full of purpose and passion, Lacey Sturm. Welcome. It's so good to have you here. Mm-hmm. So you wrote this book, The Reason, How I Discovered a Life Worth Living.
Yeah.
Your husband told you to, you told me in the green room.
That's right. That's right. He believed in me. I didn't know I could do that, so
yeah,
pretty good you said that.
Tell me a little bit about your life. You grew up with a single mom.
Mm-hmm. She was 15 when she had my brother and 16 when she had me, so she started pretty early trying to figure out how to be grown up and take care of a lot of things that are probably really heavy for her to take care of on her own. So yeah, we definitely struggled through a lot of different situations that came from that pressure and that circumstance. But also, financially we struggled, and eventually, there were 6 of us, 6 kids, and my mom was single at the time whenever we were struggling the worst, and I was going through the hardest time emotionally, and so yeah, we had a hard time growing up, but we also had amazing times, of miraculous ways that God provided for us. And my mom always had a really strong faith in God, and without that, we definitely wouldn't have been here. She was actually, counseled to get an abortion with me, and she just decided that she didn't want to go through with that. So I'm really thankful, because I have 2 kids now, and yeah, that decision really continues to be a really amazing one. I've seen a lot of good come out of that. So
your mom's faith, did you kind of pick it up? Did you have a rough time with the God concept?
Yeah, well, now that I'm older, I realize that a lot of the most amazing things my mom taught me are still, embedded in who I am. And but growing up, it was hard to see the way her faith really benefited us. When you're in the middle of the situation, it felt foolish a little bit at times because we struggled, and she would believe even when things were awful. And I remember when I was 10 years old, my cousin, who was 3 at the time and was very close to our family, my other little brother was 3, they were best friends growing up, and he was always at our house, and he ended up getting beaten to death by his stepfather. And when that happened, I just remember thinking, I thought God was, big and protected us and all that, and where was he? So I became an atheist at 10 and decided I wasn't going to believe in God, and also had
at 10.
Yeah.
Wow.
I probably didn't know the word atheist then,
no,
but I did not believe in God, and I do remember a moment even that year when I was asked if I believed and said, no, I don't. And I remember also this feeling of wanting to be sad for my cousin, because it felt loyal to him to just continue to be sad. And I also felt like if you were happy and if you were a Christian and you had a faith in God, that you were just naive and I wouldn't take you seriously, and felt like it was wrong to be happy in a world where children got beaten to death. And it just made me angry at people who had faith and people who were happy, and was really drawn to dark things and people who went through things. And it's funny because a lot of people who have joy and have faith have been through amazing, dramatic, tragedy. But I wouldn't see that. I was really already closed off to that, to even get to know somebody that way. So that at that time, I just kind of was drawn to things that were really destructive to who I was inside, which I didn't realize about the spiritual consequences of doing the things that I did. I felt like the concept of sin that I'd heard about, in my family and all my life, it was just a way to control people and a way to, put people in a box, and I just rebelled against that on purpose. Well, that's a sin, I'm gonna do it, and that's kind of was my attitude. And because I'm free to do what I want, and I have to make my own decisions, and you're not gonna live my life for me. And the Bible says sin leads to death, and we don't realize, like you can smoke a cigarette and know that, I mean, I'm not saying anything about cigarettes, but you can know that it's going to hurt you. You can smoke it and think, somebody can say, well, that's going to kill you, and then you smoke and nothing happens, and you're like, well, I'm fine, But then again, it does lead to death, obviously, black lung and all that. It's just similar, I think, with our spirit, It wears us out inside. And by the time I was 16, I was just worn out from depression and living my life the way I was living it. And, I would try to sustain some kind of happiness, and of course it was always temporary, and it couldn't be like real happiness, because obviously I had committed to being sad. It had to be short-lived, and that just wears you out. You crash, and also, if I stumbled into a relationship that was, that felt real and felt, full and gave me joy, I would cling on to that person with all my heart, because that's the closest I could get to God. And so I would make that person into a God, and of course God is the only one who can be God, and people, that's too much weight to put in a person to try to make them God. And so they let you down.
Big time.
And so when you make somebody a God and they let you down, then your whole world crashes. And so that happened enough times that by the time I was 16, I was like, I don't want to keep going through this. I have too much pain in my heart, and I'm worn out, and I don't want to live anymore.
At 16?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I planned to commit suicide. And I talk about all that in my book, about that process. And I think a lot of times when we, that mentality that I had growing up, and a lot of times as Christians, we don't always express that we understand where someone's coming from. And so we just kind of say, oh, well, they seem like really dark, so you probably stay away from them. But in the end, like if you actually said to somebody, you can understand where they're coming from, you can understand why they might make that decision. We all have struggles we're going through and trying to deal with it the best we know how. And to be able to say, yeah, I understand how you can make that decision, maybe opens them up to say, well, is there another perspective, since you do understand where I'm coming from? And so that's kind of what happened. Is when I was 16, I planned to commit suicide, and I had a miraculous encounter with God that I didn't believe in. And
tell me about that.
Well, I went to school, and my grandfather was having a heart attack. He had a heart attack earlier that week, and he was in the hospital. And my grandmother was with him every day by the time we got home that week, so she was supposed to be with him that day. And she had told us, I'm not going to be home when you get home from school. I'm going to be at the hospital. So I planned to come home early and to go about my plan. And it turns out when I got home from school, she was there, and she wasn't supposed to be, and already interrupting my process. And she just looked at me and said, there's something wrong with you. She just knows things. She just knows. She's just the kind of grandma that just knows things. And she said, you're going to go to church tonight. It's Wednesday. You're going to go to church. And I said, no, I'm not going to church. I hate Christians. And she, she's really firm about what she was saying. She was like, you know what? You're living in my house. You're going to do this and that. And we got into a big argument. And I just got her to, just didn't want to spend my last day on earth listening to her yell at me. So I decided I would go if she would just be quiet. And so I went ahead and went to church. And I sat in the back of the church and hated everybody in the room, and was waiting for it to be over. And a preacher got up and began to speak. And the funny thing is that he spoke like I was the only person there. And he began to tell stories that pretty much spelled out my entire life. And whenever he got to the end of what he was saying, he started crying. And I had never seen an old white-headed man cry like he was crying. And I had such judgment towards him as a, redneck, whatever, in Mississippi, preacher with that he wouldn't do that. But I was shocked when he was crying, and the whole room was quiet. And he said, there's a suicidal spirit in the room. And when he said that, really freaked me out. And he said, please come up and let us pray for you because God has a plan for you and he doesn't want you to die tonight. And I knew, of course, I felt like it was for me, but there was no way I was going to go up there. My pride wouldn't let me. And so he went about the service. We prayed for some people with depression and dismissed the service. And I went to the door to leave, and a man stopped me there and he said, I feel like the Lord wants me to talk to you and tell you that even though you've never known an earthly father, that God will be a better father to you than any earthly father could ever be.
Wow.
So first I thought, oh, who cares? I never knew my dad. I don't need a dad, very feminist, like I don't need any man and I hated men too. But what was shocking about, I'd seen so many men hurt my family that when I looked at this man's eyes, there was such a purity that I had never seen in a strange man's eyes before, a pure love that was so foreign to me. And when that made me stand still and even listen, was the way he was looking at me with such love. And so when he said that, I was like, I don't care. Yeah, I never knew my dad. Who cares? But then he said, and God has seen you when you cry yourself to sleep at night. And when he said that, it was like the most shocking thing, because I had done that every night since I was 10. Unless I was, passed out from drugs, I could not sleep unless I cried.
Really?
And so I would, and it was the loneliest part of my day. So when he said God saw me when I cried myself to sleep, it was really overwhelming, because what he was saying is that God knew me all along.
Yeah.
And I had hated God and had spoken out against Christians and was angry and also very lonely. And so when he said that, it was like, when you're lonely, God was there. And I was just like, okay, how do you know that? And I realized maybe God is speaking to me after all of that.
Yeah. And
so he said, can I pray for you? And for some reason, I remember having a choice and being like, I could just stay with my resolve of my identity and hating Christians, or I could just let this man pray for me. And so I just said, okay, you can pray. And so he put his hand on my shoulder and began to pray. He prayed that God would wrap his arms around this girl that he created. That's how he kind of worded it. And when he prayed that, it was like exactly what it felt like. Like the God of the universe wrapped his arms around me. And the first thing I recognized is that God is holy and good, and that all the things I thought were good was nothing compared to this presence of God that I was in front of. And that if God had said, go away forever, it would have been right. And I would have, and I almost wanted him to say it. When you see somebody who does something too good, you're like, no, I don't deserve this, You just want to get away. And it's kind of what it felt like, because I didn't know how he could love me, how he could be, how I could not die in the presence of this goodness. And at the same time, he's like pulling me in closer, and this man is praying for the love of Jesus and what Jesus did on the cross to cover me so that I could be embraced by God, and just explaining the gospel through his prayer. And that even though I do deserve to die, that Jesus already died in my place.
So true.
And so he said in his prayer, he said that something about the sins that cause pain in my heart, whether it's my own sins or sins from somebody else doing something to me, that Jesus died for all the sins in the world. And I immediately thought of my cousin's murder, that that if he deserved to be beaten, if he deserved to be spit on and mocked and killed for what he did, that Jesus was beaten and mocked and spit on and killed already, for the sins of the world. And so in that sense, there was justice in the moment, but there was such grace and mercy. And it was like God was saying, it was like my own sin of hating God was so evident in that moment. And at the same time, he was loving me.
Wow.
And so I was like, wow, God is real. He's not just real, but he's good. And he's not just good, but he's present.
Was that the pivotal moment for you where you just, everything switched?
Yeah.
You said, okay, God.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break right here.
Okay.
And when we come back, I want to keep unpacking this story because the rest of the story, it just gets better. That's what God does in your life. We'll be right back with Lacey.
I'm awake and I'm supposed to not be awake. You know, I'm supposed to be dead today, but I'm alive. And immediately I'm like, I'm alive because there's a real God.
Get social with Leon Fontaine. Connecting with Leon and The Leon Show is easier than ever. Look for us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Stay connected to everything Leon. Inspiring thoughts and practical teachings are at your fingertips. Have instant access to all things Leon through your smartphone, tablet, or computer. Discover the heart of Spirit Contemporary. Get social with Leon Fontaine.
Welcome back. My guest today is Lacey Sturm, who wrote the book, The Reason, How I Discovered a Life Worth Living. You've been just sharing a little bit about your upbringing and how kind of turned off you were to God. Didn't even know what the word atheist meant, but you were one until this gentleman began to speak. And I mean, it was literally God showing him things. It was a God moment that interrupted, because you probably would have killed yourself.
I definitely would have, yeah.
Yeah. Take the story on from there. What happened after that?
Well, I woke up the next day and I remember looking at my ceiling and just being like, well, I wasn't supposed to wake up today. Because every morning, like waking up was so awful because it just felt like this dread of waking up. Oh, I have another day to like go through and figure out, you know, why I'm here and fight with my grandmother and fight with my, you know, my whoever. And just felt like a dreadful thing waking up. And in that moment when I woke up, I remember going, I'm awake and I'm supposed to not be awake. You know, I'm supposed to be dead today, but I'm alive. And immediately I'm like, I'm alive because there's a real God who created me. And he stopped my process, you know, so I remember talking like to my ceiling, like, okay, God, I have no plans. What do you want to do? Like, why am I here? Why am I waking up? You know, and I just remember this amazing difference of lightness and like feeling all of a sudden there's a grand idea and purpose and plan behind life itself. In that moment, it was just like, okay, I'm still living. That's a miracle. And what do you want me for? Why am I breathing?
Yeah.
You know? And so I started to like daily begin to just say that. And the first thing I realized is that God loves me. All day was like God was showing me and helping me understand that he loves me. Like when I walked to school, I remember noticing nature in a way I had never noticed it. That this wasn't just a fall day with dead trees, but it was a season changing. It was life. It was nature that God gave to us, and beauty that he gave us. Like, you know, God gives you flowers. Well, he gave us like fall. You know what I mean? He gave us like beauty and a whole earth full of, you know.
Well, you said before you were more focused on the negative, the dark.
Yeah.
Is it so now? Was it changing?
Yeah. You know, I noticed that, and even with my grandma, I remember noticing my grandma is different. I was like, it struck me that God created her, and he knew her, and that she had a life that she had lived that God knew about, and she had eyes that had seen so much, and she also was part of that process of rescuing me without her even realizing it. I hadn't told her about what happened still, and I remember looking at her and just realizing God created her. And when I loved art when I was younger, and if I liked a band or if I liked some artist, I would study their work, like to know about them, and to realize that people are God's art was powerful.
Wow, that is
like,
true.
I was like, wow, this is God's art. You know, you're say something about him, this awesome God that I met yesterday. And as I went to school, I just began to look at people that I had hated the day before and just start weeping because I realized how much God loved them.
Wow.
And that really did change my perspective on people and life and everything. So.
It's like there's a whole inside change. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of people, like I don't mind psychiatrists and psychologists, because I know lots of great Christian ones who will counsel with people, but nothing takes the place of just discovering Jesus and inviting him into your life, because it's true. From that day and on, it doesn't mean everything was perfect, but what a different perspective. Did you feel different on the inside?
Yeah, I felt like a blank slate, really. Like I had no idea, like it was brand new, just like you would think. It would feel like, I don't know who I am, but I must be worth God loving.
Yeah.
And I don't know who anyone else is, and I don't know what the world's about, and I don't know what life's about, but it must be something really awesome.
Yeah.
You know, for Jesus to die for the world and redeem it.
Yeah.
That he has hope. It was a feeling of hope for things that were completely hopeless the day before. You know, it was a feeling of like, wow, God can redeem that time that was the worst, most darkest day in my life and make it the most beautiful day, because it was the darkest. And it was the dichotomy of them together was just so profound. You know, to see one day to the next, it was just blew my mind, you know. And I'm super like interested in art and mind-blowing things that make you go wow, you know, and like I just love that stuff. And so it was like all day long God was showing me his genius and in his artistry, you know, in everything he does. So it's really romantic in a sense. I don't know.
There's a saying, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And we know we're going to be in heaven one day, but do you find that now every day, like life's got seasons? Because some people, they'll give their life to Christ and they don't seem to ever change. But I mean, you gave your life to Christ years ago, and it still seems as fresh today to you as it was then. So is there something you do to experience this Jesus or pursue him?
Yeah, it's harder now that I have 2 children. It definitely looks different when you're a teenager than when you have a job, like, or you get older. And then when you marry, your relationship changes. You start to have to live out what you read about instead of just, you know, and also like, you know, how they say, I don't know, sometimes you get caught up if you're really trying to pursue God and what he wants. And I love the Bible. I had to read it for myself because I didn't trust people.
Right.
So I like want to know what it says for me. And so I fell in love with the Bible, and I would read all the time. I always had my Bible with me, and just learning things that I felt when I encountered God in worship, I would find it in the Bible. Like I just felt like I had an understanding of certain things, and I would find it in the Bible. And it was like the Bible was speaking to me and alive, like it says it is. Yeah. And so when you're a teenager or when you're single, you can spend that time doing that, and somebody knocking on your door, and you're like, oh wait, I'm learning how to love people, you know, you know. But then God will call you into a life where you really have to live it out and not just learn about it, but actually do it. So it feels different, but it's just as amazing to find worship.
It gets better every year if you keep Jesus as your friend.
Yeah.
And our time is already up, but thank you for being with us today. We'll have to have you back and do another program because I want to talk about the band and everything else too, but thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Is my life worth living? That's the question hard rock singer Lacey Sturm asked as she was planning to commit suicide. But thanks to a persistent God-fearing grandmother and a stranger's prayer, Lacey now knows the answer. That night, Lacey encountered Christ's love and she began to understand her worth and value. Now, Lacey is on a mission to share Christ's message with those who are searching, asking. In her book, The Reason, Lacey openly shares the journey of deep depression to salvation and transformation. With raw honesty and passionate faith, Lacey tackles hard questions. Lacey discovered purpose, faith, and self-worth. You can too. Get your copy of The Reason and discover a life worth living.